Okay. Okay, Swamiji.
So,
Yeah.
one, two, three, and your life.
Hari Om. It is my honor and privilege to be speaking today about Sri Swami Chidanand Ji. I want to talk about a few incidents which have been really defining for me in my relationship with Swamiji and my entire history, I would say, with spirituality for this lifetime.
Honor and privilege to
So
be speaking today
around
about
two when I was 2 years and 3 months in 1984, I had fallen very sick, and my father and mother were up with me all night. And I had a very high fever, I think above 104 or 105. And I had slipped into a coma. And at that time, my family didn't have any connection with the Divine Life Society or the ashram. And at that time, I think Swamiji was passing through Bombay. He had a train to catch in Delhi, and he had made a phone call at very last minute and requested my parents, can I sleep the night there, and I catch a early morning train. And of course, my father was more than happy to oblige, because his father had a connection with the Divine Life Society, my grandfather, that is. So he said yes, of course, and Swamiji came. He had a small meal, went to sleep, and there was not much of an exchange between my parents and him, per se, and they didn't really have any relationship with him or know him, or know about him also that much. And he had to leave early in the morning, but sometime late at night, this is the story that I have also heard from my parents. Sometime late at night, my fever became very high and I slipped into a coma. And I temporarily lost vision. I could not see, and I was in a state of delirium where I had started muttering words that were not making sense. And they had iced me, they had put lots of ice on me, they had done everything that they could. Even the pediatrician was there. He had spent many hours with my parents trying to take care of me and bring my fever down, but the fever was just not coming down. And as I was lying on my mother's lap, and with my head in her lap, and the doctors had given up, and my parents had also started to feel that there was nothing more that could be done, and there was nothing more science had to offer now. And they had already done everything. They didn't have those kind of antibiotics, or at that time. And so at that time in the morning, my mother got ready to give chai around the same time to Swamiji as he was leaving. And Swamiji just made a small visit at the door in the room where I was, requesting that can I just come in and pray with her for 1 minute. And my parents, of course, they said yes. He was aware at this point now that I had a high fever and I was in this state. And he came into the room, and he sat next to me, and he placed his hand on my forehead like this. And he muttered some mantra, or he just said a prayer. And within seconds, my eyes opened. And this is the point at which my memory takes over in the story, and up till this point has been the story that I have heard from my elders growing up. But I do remember waking up and seeing him and recognizing him, and there was always a sense of recognition with Swamiji, like meeting somebody you know. It was not like somebody new. It was almost as if I already knew him. I opened my eyes and I saw him, and I said, "Hi, Swamiji," and that recognition that was there between him and me was instantaneous. I knew him and he knew me. And from then on, we had a very special bond. We had a relationship where I could really just be myself. I never had this thing that I have to behave in a certain way when Swamiji is around as a child. I was completely myself, and it was very allowed. He was very okay with it. He didn't need me to behave in any particular way because he was a Swamiji with such a realized person himself. And for many years, it became normal to me, and I had the understanding of what it was like to communicate at a mental level, at a telepathic level. I was able to communicate, and I was able to even get answers. when I felt I had questions and I would speak to Swamiji in my mind, I got a very clear answer. And sometimes it was in the form of somebody else saying something, but there was a knowing, there was a sense of knowing, which is the part that is difficult to explain to people. It was a sense of knowing that it was coming from him. And for years, this incident really made a mark on me, and it really normalized for me what people would say is paranormal or spiritual. It was just something very normal, in my opinion, in the way that I perceived reality as a child. That this was something normal. That this is something that we can do, and it's not something extraordinary. It's just part of what humans are capable of doing, and that we can do this with each other. So I spent many years trying to understand, why did he do that? Why did he come? Why did he at that night? As they all said that if it wasn't for him, they don't know. The pediatrician had already declared that I would probably have brain damage. That even if this child comes out of this coma, she will probably have severe brain damage from having such a high fever of 107 or something like that. I always wondered, why me, and still sometimes I do wonder. But I felt that, why not me? Because at the same time, if I looked from his eyes, that everybody is a spark of the divine, and everybody, including me, is a spark of the divine. So it was really just, he could see a bigger picture that I could never see. So after that, growing up, we made a lot of visits to the ashram. We went at least once a year, every year, to Rishikesh. We spent some time there, and I always felt whenever he visited us at home, or whenever we visited in the ashram, in his presence and his aura, there was a sense of completeness, a feeling of an elevated feeling. And I think many people have felt this in his presence, simply because there was something very, very magical about being around him. And as I got older and I became a teenager, on one of the trips when he came to Bombay, and he visited and he stayed with us for a long time, he had some kind of surgery. I think it was something to do with the spleen, or I don't remember, because I was a child. But I really started to get a little bit worried, because he was starting to get a little bit older, and up until this point I thought Swamiji will live forever. It was this invincibility that came along with his aura that you never even thought. But at that time, seeing him unwell, and he had a drip and all of that, it really struck me that what if something happens to him? I mean, he is in a human body, so what if something happens to him? And I was very afraid to ask him, because there was apprehension. But while he was leaving, I asked him, I said, Swamiji, if something happens to you, when you die, what will happen to me? And it was coming from a place of deep worry and deep concern for myself, my own selfish worry about what will happen to me, because I just felt so safe. Whenever it was such a deep sense of connectedness and connection I felt, that I worried about what would happen when he died. And it was a very simple answer, and he asked me to come close, and he told me in my ear, as if he's telling me a secret, and he told me, I was never born and I will never die. And then he sat in the car, and he was leaving for the airport. He got into the car, and my mother drove him to the airport, and I was just standing there completely confused that what sort of answer is this? This makes no sense to me at that time, at that age, at that young age. It really made no sense. But I knew that there was a truth to it. I could feel it, but I could not understand. I could not understand the depth or the meaning of it until many years later. And I would say that even as I got older, and all the times that I met him, there was always a sense of connection. There was always a sense of connection even when I wasn't with him. There was now a channel to the divine which had opened up through him, and it was through him that I would speak. I would often speak to him, but it was often the universe that would answer. And that was where it started to get a little bit vague for me. But I started to understand that there's a lot more to this, and that when he is actually answering, it may not come from a personal, but it comes from the divine and from the universal. in around 2007 2008, his departure from, you know, his physical body from the earthly plane happened, and I was in Uti at the time when he was sick and he was serious, and my parents called and said that, you know, he's not looking like he's in a good state. And I was in Uti teaching at that time, and it caught me off guard, and I tried to get leave, and I wasn't able to get leave to go to Dehradun. I wanted to go, but something within told me that you know, I had to stay because I had a duty. I had a class of about 50-55 students I was teaching, and if I took a few days off, then it would throw the curriculum off completely because it was a small school. And my bosses were not very keen at all to give me the leave. So I stayed there, and I was in my office the day before he passed away. And I was in my office, and that time I had already learned Reiki, and I was sending him Reiki, and I was praying at a deep level. I was connecting with him, and I was just sending him, you know, energy in Reiki or pranic healing. You just send the divine cosmic light towards whoever you wish. And at that time I got a vision, and it was such a vivid vision of him dancing as if he's doing the tandav, and he was on one foot, and he was glowing brightly, and he was very happy, beaming with the largest smile on his face. And he was so radiant, just in that moment of connection. As I saw him, I knew at that moment that he was free, and that he did not want to go back to his body, and that he wanted to move on. And that very same day I got the message from my parents that he wasn't responding, that he was in some other kind of consciousness, some other state of consciousness. But I got the clarity, and I had the sense of knowing that he had already detached from his body. He had already chosen not to come back. And for me, at a emotional and personal level, for me that was a preparation from his end, that I felt that he was preparing me, that, you know, this is my time and I have to go. And he had decided, and I had to simply, the next day I got the news that he left his body, and I cried, and I really sobbed, and I cried, but I understood, and I respected and honored that this was his decision, and I had to just honor it. But I knew deep within, I knew that it wasn't over, or that, you know, that I just, the way I was able to see him and connect with him, I felt that I would be able to continue to have my relationship with him and get, you know, be able to still have that sense of connectedness with him, even if he wasn't in his body. So as much as I did grieve, the attachment which was there, say, you know, when other people have passed away and left their body, this was something different, because I was very sure that I would still be able to connect with him, simply because that was also part of his promise, and I had total faith in that. But in 2014, I felt sick with dengue, and I was admitted in the hospital. At this point, I had a son, 3-year-old son, Lucas, and as I was admitted to the hospital, the really strange coincidence was that it was on the 24th of September, in 2014, and it was on that night exactly, like just when the clock turned to 12, and around 1:32 I started getting a very bad headache, and around 4 o'clock in the morning my headache was so bad I had to be rushed to the hospital and admitted. And very quickly they knew that, you know, I had dengue. They did the blood test, all my symptoms matched, and as I did that, on the 5th day, I was okay. I was suffering a lot. I was in a lot of physical pain, lot of fever. On the 4th or 5th day, I started having internal bleeding, and very high fever again. Platelets were also very high. I was emotionally quite okay, just physically in a lot of suffering. But at that time, I overheard my father outside my hospital room talking to other doctors, and he sounded scared. And he has been a huge source of strength for me. So when I heard him talking to a doctor saying that we need to shift her to another hospital, and he was scared, then the question of my mortality suddenly came before my eyes, that am I really serious? Because I felt sick, but I thought I'll be fine. I didn't question it. But at that point, I got the fear. I got a deep-seated fear. And I had about half an hour, when I was alone at that moment. I told the nurse also to go. I told my mom also. I said, you go and you eat, you go and have a bath. It was sometime around 10:30, 11 in the morning. I said, go and have a bath, go freshen up. I just wanted to be alone. I was overwhelmed with feelings and I needed to process what I was feeling. And as I was there in this room, and I had this photograph of Swamiji, which always goes with me wherever, and this was in my hospital room with me. And along with this, I also had a lamp, because I don't like the white hospital lights. A small lamp from my house, my husband was nice enough to bring it for me. That was in the hospital room. And I was really starting to break down. The fear was just becoming very, very strong. A sense of despair, a sense of hopelessness, a fear that if I die, what will happen to my child, my 3-year-old child, that this is not the time for me. And I could starting to feel afraid for my life and afraid for my son, and I started to feel very alone. And in that moment, I just bursted out crying, and I was sobbing to myself. I was crying so desperately, and I felt so alone in that moment. And I said it out loud, with a real intensity, with real despair, that you said you'll always be with me. If you are really here with me right now in this moment, then show me you're here with me. And as I was crying and with this intense emotion, suddenly my lamp just went off. And I stopped crying within an instant. Like a child suddenly stops crying, I stopped crying and I was just looking at that lamp. And then again I thought, no, the disbelief took over. And I said, no, this is a coincidence. And the light came back on. Then again I was like, okay, that was a coincidence. And then a second time, right after that, the lamp went off again. And the lamp was properly connected. The lamp went off again. And at that moment, the timing of it all, just as I said, show me, and the light goes off. And then there was disbelief. And then again, the second time. And at that moment, it was literally like he was laughing and saying to me that you are doubting me again. So he did it a second time. And the light went off. And at that moment, it just completely blew away any doubt I had. Any doubt turned into just absolute. I was almost laughing at myself. I was almost laughing at the lamp coming on again. And the second time when the light went off, I knew it. I said, now he's really talking to me. Now it's become a conversation. And the lamp came on. And that was my confirmation of my own doubt. And at that moment, I had total faith. And in an instant, all that fear went away. And I had a sense of knowing that no matter what happens now, whether it's my time to go or not, everything's going to be fine. There was a deep sense of connectedness, a deep sense of I am being held. I am not alone in in everything I'm going through. And that trust was in the divine. That trust was in my connection with him. And that was the gateway for me into the divine. And since then, I would say I've still had many dreams, many messages from him, very clear messages, some very clear visions and conversations. And for me, what my biggest lesson, I would say, with Swamiji was to really start to connect with the divine and to really start to understand that connectedness, and that is something that goes beyond space and beyond time. And that the way he would address me, in the letters, he would address me with sweet things like radiant immortal Atman for someone like me. And it was so beautiful. It made me feel so beautiful. And it took a long time, a lot of working on myself to really start to integrate the broken fragments of my ego self into residing in that aspect of myself, and to be able to see that in others, to be able to see the radiant immortal being in myself and in others. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge we face in our relationships and in this world, being in this world. But that, I would say, was the biggest takeaway from me, is to really be able to, imbibe that truth, live by that truth, and to really see that in ourselves and in everyone. And also, a lot of his lectures from childhood, do start to come to me now. And for me some of the universal truths of the cosmic intelligence, and how we can connect to our breath, how we can connect to the intelligence of our body. These are some of the huge cornerstones of his teachings, I feel. To connect to, like, yoga, your practice of asana. I went and did yoga, I learned yoga, and at that moment I developed a connection with Swami Shivananda, which I never had before. And now whenever I speak to Swami Chidanandji, Swami Shivanandji and him come together. They always appear together. And this was something that had never happened, but happened to me sometime around 2016, and since then they have always appeared together as a force together. So for me, I would say the Swamiji was more of the opening, or he welcomed and brought me into the realization that there is a supreme reality, and that the way to connect to that supreme reality is through being able to realize ourselves, and to slowly start doing that by learning to control our breath, by learning to listen to our body, to listen to our emotions, to listen to our feelings. And as I have learned in my life, now I don't feel that any kind of disconnectedness from him. I know that he is eternal. I know that I can connect to him anytime I want, and that my life has become all about understanding the supreme reality, connecting to it, and sharing whatever I learn about it and from it with others, and sharing the tools that I have learned as well. That there is a divine and cosmic intelligence, that there is something very, very supreme that is there within us all. The divine spark, you can call it, to recognize that divine spark. And it is a cosmic intelligence which keeps us all alive, without which we are all just, unanimated. And another thing that I also feel that it's taken me a lot of time, and I'm continuing on that journey to continue to heal myself, to work on myself, and to be humble in that practice of just working on oneself, and being aware of my patterns, being aware of my behavior, being aware of my thoughts, my actions. And I feel that these are the things that really, with that little bit of awareness in each moment that we practice, and being aware of that, is what really helps. And one of the things that we used to share in my childhood, I would write letters to him addressing him as Mere Swamiji. And the reason I did that was because when he would come to Bombay and he would stay in a house, there would be a lot of Swamijis. And as a child, I would see a lot of people dressed in orange. But to identify him talking about my Swamiji, I would say Mere Swamiji, because that is how I identified him. And so as I got older and I would write letters, make drawings and send him, he also used to reply back to me, addressing me as Mere Tui. And for me, that was a very sweet thing, and that was a very loving and, unconditionally loving. As I got older, when I was little, he would talk about the things little children like to talk about, and cartoons, and a lot of amazing things he shared with me. And as I got older, he was able to connect at every age, with my evolution, with my consciousness, and what I was capable of understanding. He was able to appeal to it. He was able to communicate and still be able to deliver to me a feeling of being loved unconditionally. And that was, I think, the greatest blessing and the greatest honor, to have been in his presence, to have been in the presence of such light, such a being that was just filled with unconditional loving, who saw the divine presence in everybody, and to really aspire towards that ourselves, because that is what he taught us. That was his ultimate lesson to us, that we are all that what he can be, we can be, and we must aspire to be that. I am Brahman, and Aham Brahmasmi, that was one of his greatest teachings. And this is where I would like to just say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my musings and relationship with Swamiji, where Mere Swamiji and Mere Tui become one, where all is one, and I am in just gratitude, in sheer gratitude also of this opportunity of being able to speak today. Thank you so much, Swamiji, for allowing me to speak today and for taking the time to listen.
Hari Om Tui. Wait. I think I'm getting messages that you should continue for more.
For more?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So another 15 minutes. If you want to, you can go on.
Yeah, sure.
Please. So don't worry. Everybody is just loving your sharing, and I have so many messages coming that
Okay.
wonderful. So
okay.
let
All right.
it just flow. Let it just flow.
So
Nobody is worried about the time.
All right, there's a few other nice snippets. So when I was a child, I used to have a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and going and finding my mother. Every night I would do that. And one time Swamiji was staying in our house, and of course my parents would give Swamiji the best room in the house, which was the master bedroom. And so he was sleeping in their bed and I was sleeping in my room. And one night I woke up, I must have been maybe 5 years old, maybe 4 or 5, very small. And I woke up and I was looking for my mother, and I had a habit of sleepwalking also. I went into my mother's room, and I went in the bed, and I went to sleep next to Swamiji. And Swamiji was a very light sleeper. I had no idea, but later on, apparently he was looking. I woke up and I started looking for my mama after a long time, and I was crying, where is my mama? So he used to have a flashlight next to his pillow every time he would stay also. And he took the flashlight, he put it on, and then in the night we went and we searched for my mother. And apparently I had kept him awake. Basically, most of the night he did not sleep because he did not want to disturb this small child. And he was so humble and so kind to let me sleep. And he could have just been like taken me to my mother immediately, but he did not want to disturb me. And I kept him awake all night. And so that was his spirit. He did not even kill a mosquito. Whenever he would come, he would not allow anybody to kill mosquitoes in our house. And he showed the utmost gentlest and kindest spirit. And even to ants, he would tell, if there were ants somewhere, he would tell people. I think he did this in the ashram. And the Swamijis over there who would basically take care of him in the ashram always said that he would say that leave a line of sugar, drop a line of sugar, so that the ants can be directed back outside, instead of killing them, putting Baygon spray or any such thing. So these are the little things that really leave a mark on you as a child. And even though I got dengue twice myself, I have a lot of hesitation in killing mosquitoes. And for a long time I had that hesitation myself, because there is part of you that really wants to respect every living being, every living creature. And you've seen Swamiji do it. And at the same time, I also feel I had it twice, and I have 2 children, so I must protect them. So there is a conflict. But these are the amazing little things that on a daily basis, that his teachings are always present, ever present, and he is ever present. And one of the ways that I have discovered was being able to talk to your intelligence, the intelligence within your body. And this is something that Swamiji used to in Samadhi Hall when we were kids. And we used to go to the ashram for visits, and we would be so tired in the morning. We would be woken up in the morning, and they would tell us, jaldi se nao, jaldi se this, that and all. And early in the morning, before the sun would come out, we would all be sitting there very, very tired. But those are the conversations, those anecdotes, those stories. And there was even meditations that he would make us do in the morning. And there was literally like that 5 or 10 minutes where he would really tell us to close our eyes. And at that point, when he would direct us and give us a guided meditation into closing your eyes and really just connecting with your breath. And I feel that was one of the most important things, that when you connect with your breath, and when you really just listen to the flutterings, you can say, in your body, the sensations you can feel in your body, all of these things are very, very important. And when we start to listen to our body. We become in tune with our breath and body and mind through asana practice, as well as through just a simple process of listening and using our breath to release our emotions. These are some of the things, like he would talk about how breath can balance, how you can control the mind through breath. And this is some of the cornerstone of what I also do currently with my work, is very much centered around breath and understanding that, because these are the universal truths I feel that he really shared with us. And some of the things that also that come from his teachings, like simple things that when we learn in like all of this amazing new age quantum physics, and you learn from all of these new age gurus, and it really comes back to a very very simple thing, that all is one. And he always said that, which is why he showed so much respect even to the smallest, because even the smallest living being had that same divine spark, and he showed that respect even to me as a child. And we would lie down and we would touch his feet, and he would also at the same time bend down and not let us touch his feet, and at the same time he would bless us. But there was that much humility in him, that there was that much understanding and connection to the divine. He operated out of there was no ego self. Yes, there was some amount which he needed to operate in this earthly plane, but most of his identity resided within the cosmic intelligence at a much higher level. And so he was able to see a lot of he had a wider perspective. This time, as it's linear on our earthly plane, it was not he was not limited by it. He was not limited by the physical experience. He was not limited by his body. He was not limited by and what now would be called, in science or pseudoscience and paranormal science, that he had abilities which we can aspire towards, that all humans are capable of. And those abilities were not the goal, they were not the aim. The aim was to find that sense of self within, to abide in that sense of self, which is eternal, which is permanent. And these were byproducts, the siddhis he had, the, you can say, supernatural powers which he showed, which seems supernatural to us simply because we are so ignorant. We get so caught up in the three-dimensional world, we lose touch with how to go within and how to really hone our prana, how to hone our life force, and to really use it in a way that is intentional, in a way that is focused. And he had that. It was beautiful to see. And for me, I think that was the most beautiful thing. And to be able to continue on my journey as a seeker, to really just continue on in my self-awareness journey and pathway towards being the best that I can, to really just honor the fact that he did somehow choose whether or not I don't have to be special, I just have to be divine, and that is enough. Like he saved a mosquito, he saved an ant, why would he not save me? And it really becomes that simple. And at that level, I just feel that is what I have to keep recognizing in my daily life, and respecting and honoring people for whatever people feel. So when you are faced with that dilemma in the world of relationships, when you are dealing with the world, that is something that we do find conflict within. We do not find total clarity as much as we know these lovely concepts, is because we don't we try very hard to control and change things around us. We don't have the trust in the divine. Like we trust when we eat our food that it's going to get digested. We trust in our body. And when we are trusting in our body, we are trusting in the divine. Everything in this universe is connected. It's not disconnected. The intelligence that is digesting my food, the intelligence in my body, is the very same intelligence at work that makes galaxies, that basically created everything, all of us, that basically even creates life as we know it, from a little baby, from a fetus into a proper full human being with their own feelings, and as it continues. So this is a self-evident principle, and that is I would say his biggest gift to this world was this lesson for us, to really look within, to find that divine spark, to be the best we can be, and to continue to recognize that in everyone, in every interaction when our ego is bruised, to take the time, review our feelings, be aware, this is what I'm feeling, use the breath, exhale, to release that, to release wherever in our body we are storing that anger, wherever we are storing those emotions, to use that, to release it from our body, and then come back to our center, to come back to that part of us which is within the eternal. And so for me, my guru is that space where I can connect to the divine cosmic intelligence. But now, as he was, I have memories of him, but my relationship with him now is not limited to his form. My relationship with him now has become much more universal. I would say even when I get a message from a tree, if I put out a question into the universe, and something within the wind or something within the tree, something when I'm looking outside the window gives me that answer, I get it from a post that I see on social media, anything, it is at that level that he operates now, because he is free of that identity, he is free of that body. And so it is at that level that we must continue to connect with him. Of course, the gateway can still be the form, can still be his face, the way he looked, the way he sounded, all of those things, but those are the things that he always told us were temporary, and we must really seek that which is permanent, that which is the indwelling divine spark within us all. And for me, this is so beautiful. This was handwritten by him to me. I will read it out in his beautiful handwriting. May the joy of the indwelling divine presence with you fill your being. And this is the way he recognized each and every person, and this is why he never had any enemies, because he never reacted from the space of ego. Even if people went after him, he never responded with the same kind of venom that people had towards him. And that was the most beautiful lesson. He lived as the example of what we can all become, and what we must all strive towards. I feel at a personal level is that when we are attacked, yes, we must have our boundaries, we must know, but we must at the same time choose our reactions, choose how we respond, and respond from a place of recognizing the divine within other people. And that is challenging. I also face my challenges, but this is the truth that we come back to, that we center ourselves in. And then when you make that mistake, you can re-evaluate where you went wrong and where you can do better next time. And so, I have really enjoyed sharing this sharing whatever I have learned from Swamiji. So many beautiful times with him, and also, of course, he will always be with us all as he promised. And I will hand it back to you, Swamiji, if there's.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tui.
Thank you,
so much.
Swamiji. Hari Om.
Wonderful sharing.
Thank you.
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Hari Om Tat Sat.